are full beings, body and soul, across moments, mundane and tumultuous. Here's a journal entry from February, jabbering through a metaphor. And this is my workaday life. Certainly, I don't always make up funny sounds for a living, of course, or read Dylan Thomas or do impressions. I teach English as a second language. My workday world ended with a student, 1 week old, to Vancouver, laughing as she said, "Goodbye, Kevin." It was probably the first time for Ai to say goodbye to an English teacher while also using his name instead of the requisite sensei. It must have felt funny or novel in her mouth. I put my notes and lesson plans into my pannier at the side of the desk, stepped out of the classroom, and walked past reception with its bustle of international students, Brazilians, Koreans, Saudis, and a dozen other nationalities. An airport without any luggage, an airport of the future. Stepping outside was an awakening to my other life. I teach English as a second language, 9 to 2:30 at a private school in Vancouver, then my other day begins. The transition from the one life to the other feels like a complete submersion. When you jump into a lake on a summer day, you break through that undulating surface in seconds, and every inch of your body becomes cooler, and your ears are full of that muffled sound, and your hair lifts from your scalp. With an almost effortless jump, you've arrived in another medium. But I'm not on vacation at a lake. I'm stepping into the latter half of a Wednesday, and detritus from the day often swirls around me. Most importantly, I'm not choosing to change to 2:30. Time marches, lurches, breaststrokes, flies, or collapses on its own bearings. No, it's as if time tipped the school, and most everything went into the drink. Textbooks, tables, teachers, students. I, the bank clerk, whose name means love in Japanese, and is written with a Chinese character for heart, or Heijin, who said her name means smarter than teacher. And that 17-year-old from Colombia with the biggest smile in the world, whose name I kept forgetting. And in the back of my mind, I want to write a story about an aging Polonius of an ESL teacher who, whenever he forgets a student's name, claims that it's not forgetfulness on his part, but an unsuitable name that doesn't blend into the student's aura. And my old fuddy-duddy doubts about my skills as a teacher, which certainly doesn't jive with the laughter, smiles, and progress reports from my students, and all this and more swirling around in this brand new, yes, we're still in the lake metaphor, environment of weightlessness, a moment of cluttered and stunned freedom. Metaphors give us traction into a moment, a setting to explore, a terrain to walk through or swim through. Metaphors have quite literally carried me into another life. The joy of a book tour, at least the first time around, is swimming day after day in the nude, which sounds like swimming day after day in the nude. And so don't misunderstand me. But if you did want to use this as your kind of hook for your book tour, by all means, please, book tour in the nude. And, I'm sure you'll sell books. It's guaranteed. Just do it in the summer. Please, I ask you to do it in the summer. The joy of a book tour is also meeting up with friends and learning about other places around the province. Here's what I wrote for a friend about her beautiful town of Cumberland in a poem that I then read in the evening at the Cumberland Brewing Company, accompanied by the Poet Laureate of Cumberland. And the story I hear is that he just kind of arrived in Cumberland one day and kind of announced himself as the Poet Laureate. So, of course, we have a Poet Laureate in our midst, and there's a fine tradition of it. But if you find a small town in BC and you just roll in and you just say, "I'm the Poet Laureate," and you're loud, you can be like Kevin Flesher. And I think over time they officially went, "Oh, okay," after he kind of rolled in and said, "I'm your Poet Laureate." And this is called, Cumberland, if you've never been there, has one main street, Dunsmuir. And I did a little bit of research on Robert Dunsmuir, who the town is named after. This is called Robert Dunsmuir, 1825, 1889. And it was in my friend Heather's home, and she has a dog named Oli. This is for Heather McLaren. With his imbroglioed tongue, Oli's drinking sounds like a toilet flushing. He moseys into the kitchen to sit down next to me, a statue of perfect supplication. On our walk, Heather yelled at him in Polish, like some curse to be carried through the generations, if he should dare poop in a neighbor's backyard. We talked about Cumberland's Main Street's namesake, Robert Dunsmuir, whose coal mining operations earned him millions. At the age of 7, he lost his father, mother, grandmother, and 2 sisters to cholera. Then, 3 years later, his grandfather. It's as if he grew up into a plan to remove all the earth's soil, so that there would be no place for burials, making death too great an inconvenience for anyone. Oli's simple enough to understand, but what about the top dogs? What drags them along their path of extraction? Is a question nearly as good as a roadblock? Citizens of Cumberland donate money to buy some patch of forest as the rest has been given away for logging. Nothing is as perfect and flawed as love. Ecology comes from the Greek for house, which in English roots back to Old German for hide. These days, houses are mostly unaffordable hearts with a dog's tail beating time inside. Grief is a hole in the earth. Metaphors come from above and below. They are a groundswell of ideas. Here's a short journal entry from earlier this year which walks us through a metaphor straight into Bing Bong. Jabbering with Bing Bong, people ask who that is, and here she is in this paragraph. This page is a mirror that I look into. I look behind myself and see the door that I've come through. Outside that, I see a blue sky over the evidence of an accident. It's an old crash, and there's moss growing around the wreckage. Someday it will be reclaimed by all manner of greenery. It will be an old knoll, and when I step outside on an unseasonably warm January evening to walk the dog, he'll lift his leg and piss. And he's been pissing on more spots than usual tonight, as he has had a play date with a much bigger neighbor dog, but all they did was growl at each other, and now he's asserting ownership and strength all over the world. I want to race home and bring this insight to you, to have as a gift for you, you who love him so much, you who love him to tears, because he does put the world into a funny and cute, small packaged perspective. To paraphrase another dog, here's an emotionally sensitive moment for me to poop on! And the world is so full of creatures to love, and you are my reminder of that wealth of consciousness, great and small, and you are such a singular force in the world with your intensity of body and mind and your sneezes that smell fragrant. My lungs are full of dead flowers, you said, while we sat between the 2 dogs, trying to get them to buddy up. Attention without feeling is only a report, said Mary Oliver. As writers, we're looking at the world for detail, along with what Gerard Manley Hopkins calls the inscape of an object, its spiritual and emotional core. In Nelson, this past April, on my book tour, I spent an afternoon visiting an ashram on the edge of Kootenay Lake. Here's a poem that came out of the afternoon walking back, which I then read at the Blue Mule Cafe. And Nelson is a really wonderful place. They don't have a poet laureate. So if you rolled into town, you said, I'm the poet laureate of Nelson, you've got a good chance. In the nude, especially in the summer. If you were nude in Nelson, they would love you. Nelson's like Wreck Beach. It's kind of like Wreck Beach without the water. And this is called From the Ashram. Piss-poor dandelions celebrate the side of the street in their yellow wigs of shredded paper, little hobo clowns. Green arms held out for raindrop alms or coins of laughter from the sun. I too am dependent on what comes round the bend. At the sound of a car, I turn and lift my thumb. 20 years ago, I hitchhiked across the country, Surrey to Halifax, a tent and sleeping bag my insurance. The woman who picked me up in a '56 Chevy truck, her ashtray packed with wind-shielded butterflies. We slept in my tent that night, her German shepherd between us, prudence and trust side by side. Occasionally, the world opens wide. You wake from long ago to the road ahead, hear all of creation cheering us on. As we jabber with each other, or we jabber to ourselves, or we jabber our thoughts out on the page. From these orts and warts, we find patterns, see things differently, and take a leap, a risk into a bigger picture metaphor. And in conclusion, while metaphors are what I feel most comfortable in, certainly there are other devices used in poetry. Image, diction, rhetoric. plundered language from elsewhere made into a new pattern. What I love about Dylan Thomas's Fern Hill is the lushness of the language that draws us back to a time when the world was seen in its abundance for the first time. I also like challenging poetry because it takes me back to when language was heard for the first time. You remember when, the world was, everything was up, and you kind of listened and you understood the emotional tone, but those words were just kind of glistening, and you wanted in, and you knew you were going to understand what was happening. I feel the same way with a lot of more challenging poetry. And for this reason, I love John Berryman, a hip cat from mid-20th century America who mashed together jive talk with Renaissance and Shakespeare. And here's a poem under the influence of Berryman. And I'm sorry, I prepared all of this, and the one thing I forgot was my flask by my desk. And I was going to drink from my flask for John Berryman because he was such a drunk. But I'll do my best. I'll do my best without the flask. So, and John Berryman read drunk so many times with a beard like this and an angle. And the story of him is that he was in Dublin and somebody gave him a shot and he took it and he said, "What's that?" And they were like, "Ouzo." And so he excused himself and supposedly he'd flown to Greece to drink more of it for who knows how long a period of time. And I like that there's a certain darkness to him in his life, but then there's the flip side too in the play of language. This is, under the spirit of Berryman, Them Bones. Friends, life is lousy with death. We must thank stand-up comics for ushering out the fears and old griefs which were wailing loudly through the film. We settle back into the story where someone asks, "Why no holiday to remember the gag man? No thank you cards. You made me laugh my anxiety off. Let's give them Easter." We walk about snapping our fingers until the next horror leapeth from the mouth of the reaper. Your father nearly died from diverticulitis. Your friend took his life last night, and your niece had attempted the same. Her message box is full. Worry gnaws us down to the bone, clattering as we clamber through rooms. Outside, we slip apart in the rain, cry ourselves into gutters and potholes. We awake to an usher's flashlight. Some have skipped out in the darkness, others will meet strangers under the slow rise of the credits, talk trivia. The stuntman's cremated remains were mixed in the... Soon,